The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
I realize that I start almost every podcast with some sort of miscellaneous beef, and that's slowly or quickly becoming my thing. But I have a beef today, and it's with the waste management people of Southern California. Here's the story, as I'm led to believe it goes. For many years, waste management, or trash collecting, if you want to be specific about it, was contracted out to a particular company. It might have actually been the company Waste Management. I don't know. And for many years, things ran without a hitch. And a little under a year ago, suddenly, the trash stopped getting picked up. And I don't know if this is the case for everyone in Los Angeles, but it certainly impacted those of us in West LA, where the recycling bins, the trash bins, they were just overflowing, and once every 2 to 3 weeks, someone would show up and dump it, and then we had no idea what was going on, and our apartment manager was like, if it's full, just try to keep it in front of your door or something. And then as soon as they unload it, you can throw your stuff in there and we'll do it all over again. Eventually, they got that situation sorted out. Whoever the new company was contracted with it figured out how the hell to get their people out everywhere within a week. And now they come every 8 minutes on Wednesday. Today is Wednesday, by the way. I'm aware of that. They come about every 8 minutes on Wednesday from 7:30 in the morning until 10:30. What the hell are they doing? How many... I'm going to try to withhold the rage within. How many freaking trucks do we need here? I can count as many as 3. Which would be plant recycling, so foliage, actual recycling, and garbage. What are these other trucks doing? Who are these people? What are they collecting from my building? What are they collecting from this street? The reason I'm so annoyed about this is not because there's any issue with trash in my home or in our apartment complex right now. Far from it. They're always empty. I want to do a podcast, and I'm tired of that banging in the background. There it goes again. I can't wait any longer. It's after 10 o'clock here on the Pacific Coast. I got to do a damn show. Anyway, so figure this out, guys. Can we, plus they often wake up my child, and that's arguably the greatest offense of all. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, everybody. I'm Dan Besbris. This is your Wednesday morning edition of the podcast. At Dan Besbris, if you want to give me a follow on Twitter. At HoopBallFantasy, if you want to follow the website's Twitter, go to hoop-ball.com for more information on all things draft-related. That's what's going on right now. The NBA draft is tomorrow. And I'm very proud to announce that after a brief layoff of about a month, longer than we intended, the Lakers cast is back. Me and my guys, Dan Besbris, Eli Bauman, Eric Noble, reunite last evening to record a Lakers suddenly in the running or in the lead, potentially, for a lot of big-name free agents or trade possibilities this offseason. It was a lot of fun. We recorded it as the news broke that Greg Popovich had flown? Jeez, Dan, get yourself together. Had flown to San Diego to meet with Kawhi Leonard after basically being rebuffed for weeks. He didn't want to meet with the Spurs. Kawhi did not want to meet with the Spurs. And Ramona Shelburne then putting out an article with Woj that stated that Kawhi is still pretty married to the idea of playing in Los Angeles. He's a Riverside County boy, which for those of you who are not from Southern California is east of LA, kind of southeast-ish a little bit. Southern California is made up basically of about 5 counties, give or take. 6, 7 if you want to start to work your way up the coast a little bit. But the core ones here are Los Angeles County, which obviously is the biggest, San Diego, which is way down south, San Bernardino County, Orange County, Riverside County, and you could probably argue Ventura County if you were going west. Once you get into Kern County, you're effectively out of Southern California or into the Central Valley. That's how it works. Santa Clarita, is that the county that's got a... No, I don't believe so. So anyway, give or take. Like I said, give or take, 5 or 6 counties, Southern California. Riverside is probably the second farthest of them from the main parts of L.A. Obviously, Los Angeles County contains that. Orange County is relatively close on the southern side. San Bernardino County on the eastern side. San Diego way south, and then Riverside, which is kind of southeastish, as I said. You have to make a pretty good trek to get into L.A., but it seems as though Kawhi Leonard loves this notion of Southern California. Ramona Shelburne also going on radio to talk about how, with all the time he spent in New York last year with the quad rehab, he wasn't a huge fan of East Coast style. He's tired, apparently, of the Spurs because of he believes he was mistreated by the organization and Tony Parker in particular. And so he's ready for a new start. But of course, the East Coast thing, if that's really out of the picture for him, eliminates the top 2 contenders for his services. The Philadelphia 76ers, you could argue, who have strong young players and a good draft pick. Not a great draft pick, but a good one. And, number 1 pick from last year who really hasn't done anything yet. The Boston Celtics, who just have assets pouring out of every orifice in their organization. And potentially the New York Knicks, who, you figure they could clear space somehow and bring him in. And it's New York, so, bright lights, big city kind of thing. Maybe that would draw him in. The Knicks would have to do something with probably Joakim Noah. That would be the big one to get out of the way to figure out how to get Kawhi Leonard into town. I don't know what they'd have that the Spurs would want, necessarily. Their young players are not that young or not that good or both. Right? Franklin Ntilikina, that's basically it. As far as young guys go, they're not going to trade away Kristaps Porzingis. Not on the contract he's on right now. And his Cantor's not young. Tim Hardaway Jr. is not young anymore. Courtney Lee, Lance Thomas, Kylo Quinn, Emmanuel Mudiay. Nobody wants that dude. So anyway, wiping out those teams basically leaves L.A. I've heard the rumors too, by the way, that Phoenix was in the running, but he ain't going to Phoenix. Dude wants to win wherever he's going. And Phoenix was the worst team in the NBA. And it really wasn't all that close. They were terrible. They have some decent players, but they played terrible basketball. Disorganized, just, disgusting. I felt dirty. I had to wash my eyes out with saline after watching Phoenix Suns basketball. I had heard the Kings, right? Because, these teams get lumped into the mix because they have the 1 and the 2 pick in this upcoming draft. But Kawhi doesn't want to go to those places. He wants to go to a place that can very quickly assemble a winning team around him, and that's L.A. Which direction in L.A. remains to be seen. Obviously, the Lakers are the storied L.A. franchise, so they have, one would imagine, the upper hand. They also have boatloads of cap space, and they're working on bringing in LeBron James, which, if you're Kawhi Leonard, yeah, you'd take that opportunity. That's the place you say, I want to go there. And I know that the Spurs don't want to trade to the Lakers. Long, 20-year, 25-year rivalry brewing out in that direction, but they might not have a choice because they got to get something. So we shall see. We also talk about, by the way, if you want to listen to that Lakers podcast, we go into great detail on the Kawhi Leonard stuff, massive detail on LeBron James as well. Being the three of us, by the way, being products of Los Angeles area private schooling and knowing what we do about LeBron and his kids, yes, that does come up on it. So go check that out. @HoopBallLakers is the Twitter handle. The podcast has been tweeted out twice over the last 12 hours, so you can easily check it out. It's available on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, YouTube, Facebook, basically anywhere you could go, you will find it. The Hoopball YouTube page, by the way, has all that stuff. Hoopball Facebook page, same deal. So anyway, that's the news on the Kawhi Leonard front. And then, right before we go on air today, Dwight Howard's traded. I mean, this is really something. We're having a fun time leading up to the draft. This was, by all accounts, a salary dump for the Charlotte Hornets, but it's also, to me, this turns this team into a potential fantasy team again. We talked about Charlotte 2 weeks ago when we were discussing the Southeastern Division and how basically that entire team was hot garbage as long as Dwight Howard was blowing up their fantasy value. With Dwight in town, grabbing 12.5 rebounds and clogging up the paint, and yes, he actually, by all accounts, had a decent season in Charlotte, but the modern NBA, he's just not built for it. A high-volume, horrific foul shooter who turns the ball over, can't pass, and has this intense desire to be a focal point of the offense. He took the second most shots on the team last year. In this iteration of the NBA, that should not be happening. So with him in Charlotte, he took shots away from guys who could be, taking three-pointers. I mean, Marvin Williams should always be taking more shots than he gets, and he didn't. Kemba Walker, he's the lead horse on that team. He does it all. Suddenly, Dwight Howard leaving town, Cody Zeller becomes a guy worth discussing again. Willie Hernan-Gomez is back on the radar, although he would seem to still be the second or third string center, depending on what you think of Frank Kaminsky and the health of Cody Zeller. Marvin Williams, the 4.7 rebounds, can go back up to 6.5, where it was in seasons past. Nick Batum can go back to grabbing 6 rebounds instead of 5. Kemba Walker maybe could get 3.5 instead of 3. Cody Zeller could perhaps get 7 or 8 instead of 5. All of these things are back in play because one statistical category goes from being a negative for every single player on the Charlotte Hornets to either a positive or a potential positive. Every single player on the Charlotte Hornets, with the exception of Dwight Howard, averaged fewer than league average rebounds. Every single one of them. And I'm including guys that basically qualify in that one. So, a guy like Marcus Page, who played 5 games and grabbed a total of 4 rebounds, he's not going into that bucket for me. But if you take the bulk of the play, look at your Roto League. That's a good example of what it takes to actually do it. Most of your Roto Leagues, you're going to need a team that averages something like 6 rebounds per game played to be kind of middle to upper part of the pack. 5.6, 5.7 or something like that will get you into the mix. Cody Zeller, second most rebounds on the team at 5.3. Every single Hornet, with the exception of Dwight Howard, sub-average in rebounding. His departure frees up 12.5 rebounds per game, and those will just go to other people. Okay, a couple of offensive rebounds he grabs, maybe those won't go directly to other people. Let's conservatively say like 9 to 10 of his rebounds get split amongst the rest of these guys. It depends on who's getting the minutes, obviously. A lot of them will go to whoever plays the bulk of center minutes. But remember Cody Zeller, when he was playing, and he's often hurt. Often. I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. But when he was actually seeing minutes the year before this most recent season, I'm going to call it last season, 2016, 2017, there were stretches where he was very good. He was a solid fantasy contributor. He averaged 10 and 6.5 with a steal and a block, with some serious ups and downs. I don't know that he gets back to that mark. Does he average 28 minutes a game this coming year? Possibly. He's back on the radar as a last-round pick. Marvin Williams is back on the radar as a guy potentially worth drafting. He was atrocious this year. 9.5 points, 4.7 rebounds. That was his worst rebounding season since 2012. And he was coming off of 2 very consistent and very strong years. He can give you that sort of autoportion. 11 points, 6.5 boards, 1.5 assists, almost a steal, almost a block, 1.6 threes, good free throw shooter, no turnovers. Marvin Williams, because of the turnover thing, he never turns the ball over. He averages 1 turnover a game over his entire career. And over the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons, he's never been higher than 0.8 turnovers per game. He's never going to blow you out of the water with his stuff, but he's back in the mix. Nick Batum suddenly becomes way more interesting because he can rebound again. Another guy, by the way, that has run into some injury troubles in the past. This is a team that takes on a completely different look. I know they got Timofey Mozgov back, but he ain't playing. In terms of what's going on with Dwight Howard in New Jersey, Brooklyn, I have no idea. They owe him a ton of money. It's a $20 million contract. Does he play out there? I mean, they want to develop the young guys. That one, I don't have a feel for it yet. Will he get bought out? Probably. One would assume they'll probably try to trade him for part of the year. He'll get some minutes. They'll try to keep him healthy. And then if they can't move him, they'd probably buy him out. So I wouldn't invest in Dwight Howard anyway, but Dwight Howard playing half the number of minutes as usual, that's even worse. We haven't even gotten to the team we were going to cover today. It was the New York Knicks. With all this stuff going on, we'll dig into them now. The Knicks went under this year, by the way. It's the magic of tanking. Once they realized they had no shot and started throwing in the towel a little bit, the Knicks went 29-53, which kept them under by a game and a half. They might have gone over if Kristaps Porzingis doesn't get hurt and they keep trying. I thought, by the way, that the Knicks would go under regardless of what happened with Carmelo Anthony. I figured they would go into tank mode with him gone, which meant that you had that sort of 2 to 3 game cushion where they probably would. I mean, let's say Porzingis sticks around and the Knicks compete for another couple of weeks. Is that another 2 to 3 wins? Do they tank harder once they realize they're out? It's tough to say, but when a team goes into a maximum rebuild, we kind of knew they had this extra chance to stay under because they'd be actively trying to lose games at the end of the year. They got better as a team when Melo was shipped out of town, which was a big deal, and that happens sometimes. It's kind of that same Paul George situation in Indiana where they just, more things could happen, although Melo, different kind of player in that respect. He's a guy that gummed up the offense, and the other guys in the Knicks had a chance to shine a little bit. But they stayed under. That's all that matters. We got that one right. 29-53, the final record. They'll probably do better than that next year. But again, that's really pretty fully contingent on the health of Porzingis, who has shown himself to be a very impressive young basketball player. As far as contractually, the Knicks are fairly locked in unless Enes Kanter decides to opt out. Now, this is a dude making $18.5 million as a decent but far from superstar caliber center. So I don't know. I mean, how do you convince yourself to opt out of that kind of money? There's almost no way he makes $20 million a year on the free agent market after the teams have now settled back after the crazy spending sprees we've seen from a couple off seasons back. Financially, it's probably in his best interest to take that money, but perhaps he wants to be somewhere else. Meanwhile, Joakim Noah, he's owed $18 million next year and $19 the year after that. Tim Hardaway Jr. just signed, remember, a $70 million contract 4-year, $70 million contract, so he's got 3 years left. Courtney Lee's got 2 years left at $12.5 million a season. Lance Thomas is due to make $7 million this year. Even Ron Baker's making $4.5 million. Kyle O'Quinn has a player option. Not sure exactly how that's going to shake out. And then you get into the young guys. A lot of cheap contracts coming off the books for the Knicks this year, but Enes Kanter is obviously the big one. If he opts out, their projected salary for this coming season drops by $18 million, and suddenly they have a bunch of cap space. I'm not sure that it matters. Unless they can convince a couple big-name free agents to come to town and take a discount, they will never have enough to sign 2 max guys, and that's generally what it takes these days to get 1 max guy. And unless you're Russell Westbrook, where you sort of don't care who you're playing with, you're just going to go at 9,000 miles an hour and try to set triple-double records. So the Knicks are in a little bit of trouble. The following year, their projected salaries do come down a fair amount, but also Kristaps Porzingis would be a restricted free agent, so that turns things around a little bit as well. They're in a bind, is what we're telling you, especially if Kanter opts in. Then the Knicks are just sort of stuck. And they do what they have to do. As far as fantasy value goes, Kristaps Porzingis is a very safe but injury-prone player. Let me explain myself. From an actual per-game value standpoint, he's an incredibly safe asset. As a near 80% foul shooter, a big man that scores, knocks down threes, and blocks a boatload of shots because his wingspan is not unlike a pterodactyl. He was averaging 2.4 blocks per game last year, a number that probably would have come down a hair over the last 2 months of the NBA season, but probably not a ton. 2.4 maybe comes down to like 2.2, 10% dip. 0.8 steals per game. That was a pretty high number for a center. We'll take that every day. Then 23 and 7. He was rolling, and then he got hurt. And now he's coming off of a massive injury. An ACL thing. That's not nothing. I am not drafting Kristaps Porzingis. I know that there are going to be some folks that advocate a stash. I see a couple of scenarios. If you sort of squint your eyes, you can see a couple of places where Kristaps makes sense. A head-to-head league where you can keep a guy on your bench and it won't punish you, because then you just hope that he's playing at the end of the year. Or a keeper league where no one kept him and you can keep him, like a roto situation. You tuck him at the end of a very long bench. And the only reason you're doing it is, let's say you're in a keeper league where there's like a 1 or 2 round penalty the following year. Porzingis is probably going to go 6th, 7th round. People think he's going to play half a year, if that, which means you'd probably be able to keep him for a 4th or 5th round price the following year, and then it's a massive deal. So you can plan way ahead. You have to be pretty confident in your team, and then you also have to keep him on your bench the entire year. Until potentially he's playing, let's say, the last month or 2. They're not going to rush him. I don't think this Knicks team is about to score a whole bunch of superstar caliber guys and make a run at a championship. So there's no point in bringing him back quickly. Which segues to Enes Kanter. If he opts in to his contract in New York, he's a steal. He could be a massive steal because there's just no one else. There's no one else. I'm sorry, Kyle O'Quinn. I think your time to maybe do anything is done. Joakim Noah, don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself. That's the only other center on the roster. Is Kyle O'Quinn. Enes Kanter this season averaged 14 and 11 on 59% shooting and 85% at the free throw line, which, by the way, I'd like to point out, I have in the past been less than enthusiastic about Enes Kanter. That was not during his time in New York, guys. That was in Oklahoma City, where he was averaging the same 14 points per game he had this year, but only 7 rebounds, which was barely above league average, and 78.5% free throw shooting, which was basically league average if you wanted to have a center that didn't hurt you. Yes, he's always been a solid field goal percentage guy, but this year, by all accounts, was kind of record-breaking for him. His first stint, or right when he first got traded, I should say, to the Oklahoma City Thunder, way back in 2015, he popped off for 19 and 11 per game. And even then, the free throw shooting was much closer to his career mark. He's a career 77% foul shooter that shot 85% this season. We didn't see that coming. No one could have. I mean, he's never been close to that. His highest over an entire year prior to that was 79.7. So he was way out in front. And I don't know if that's sustainable or not. Maybe it is. Maybe he just got better magically after being in the NBA for 6 years. I don't know. I'm inclined to say probably not. But the 59% shooting, he could get up to 58%, 57%. He was very good in that respect, and it wasn't like the Knicks had a bunch of superstars that were drawing attention. He just played well. He took shots that were afforded to him, and he made them. He had a good shooting year. But without Porzingis around, even if he doesn't hit those percentage benchmarks, he's going to be a good source of points and rebounds, and he's going to be a decent, at the very least, source of field goal percent and free throw percent. What he won't be ever is something on the defensive side of the ball. He is atrocious. 0.5 steals, 0.5 blocks. By the way, matched his career best in both of those categories. He'd never been better than half and half. Half a steal and half a block. I'm going to start calling Enes Kanter half and half, and no one's going to know why. You guys will, but nobody else will. And for a guy like me, who loves defensive stats, to actually say I like Enes Kanter tells you how much I like percentages as well. Of course, again, the question about free throw percent remains. Does he come back towards his career mark? My guess would be probably. Still, with no one else to play center, almost anybody getting you 11 rebounds a game and not hurting you in particular categories is worth drafting. Will he be a top 50 asset on a per-game basis again? I doubt it. Because he would need those percentages to stay at their career high marks. And he was number 49 this year, setting all of his career bests. So I do have questions about where he ends up getting drafted. If he falls into the 70s, I would happily take Enes Kanter because I think he probably ends up as like a top 65 guy this year. Let's say his 59% shooting comes down to 57, and his free throw comes back towards 80, where it's always been. That drops him by probably a round to a round and a half. Maybe his scoring goes up with no Porzingis for that long stretch. Maybe that goes up. Maybe he doesn't even opt in, and all of this is useless information. Apologies. Tim Hardaway Jr. He was a guy that we were relatively high on at hoop ball, but just couldn't stay healthy. Turned out to be kind of, a little bit of bad luck here, a little bit of tough luck there, a stress injury that kept him out for a long stretch of time this year, and he ended up playing just 57 ball games and never really got it going. He had his worst shooting season since, back with New York the first time around at just 42%. Some of that, one would imagine, is because he took 7.2 three-pointers per game, but also had his worst three-point shooting year of his career. He's an 80-something% free throw shooter. That's pretty consistent. He did score 17.5 points per game, but let's be honest, we were expecting more. 17.5 points per game was solid. 4 rebounds, 2.7 assists, 1.1 steals, 2.3 three-pointers. All that stuff sounds decent, but high volume, very low percent from the field. And 33 minutes per game, you could expect him to sort of fall into a couple more of the popcorn stats. All that being said, I do think that there's room for growth with Tim Hardaway. there's room for growth. Some of that is, the fact that Porzingis is likely to miss some time at the beginning of the year. Some of that is that Jarrett Jack, Ramon Sessions, Michael Beasley, Trey Burke, all of these guys were signed for this season, basically. Does he build any clout with the Knicks? I mean, he's a guy that's signed there long term, so that has to mean something. The biggest factor for me when talking about Tim Hardaway is health. If he could have gotten and stayed healthy this year, he could have had a much better season. Simple as that. Because there were some games where he flashed massive, massive potential. But it was just not frequent enough. He got off to a slow start shooting. And then basically as soon as he started to find his groove, done. First 4 games of the year. 8, 14, 6, and 11 points. On like 25% shooting. And then all of a sudden, things started to come around. 34-point game. Then a 13, 23, 21, 16, 19, 26. He had a stretch prior to his injury from the middle of November until the end of November where he rattled off 28, 26, a couple of 13ers, 38, 22, 11, 16, 12, 16. No, excuse me, I gone too far. The 12-point game was where he got hurt. That was the one where the stress reaction crept up, and then he didn't play until January. He had a couple of games with some adrenaline, but it wasn't the same. He was getting steals early in the season. That petered off a bit after his injury. Still got some, but not as many. He was just a different guy. Until, I would argue, like mid-March. It took him until March to sort of get his feel back. He played pretty well, actually, towards the end of the season, but it just wasn't enough to balance out the injuries, the very rough couple of games at the beginning of the year, and then the extremely rough time coming back from injury. He never quite looked the same. So he's a guy where within his canter, I'm honestly confused as to where he might end up. I do think Tim Hardaway Jr. slips in this draft. I know he scored 17.5 points per game, but I feel like people felt disappointed because of the injuries, because of the long slumps, because of the bad shooting percentage. I think he left a bad taste in people's mouths. That's the impression I'm getting, which means the fact that he finished at 84 on a per-game basis, and of course way worse than that overall because of the missed games, top 140 on totals, to me he feels like a guy that could slip down near 100. You get him near 100, you're looking at a guy that could beat that mark by, I would argue, 2 to 3 rounds of value by the end of the year. You could see a top 70 guy on a per-game basis this year, and all he'd really have to do, again, a per game, I stress, all he'd really have to do is get his shooting percentage up from 42 to like 43.5. Because his turnovers were good. Maybe 1.2, 1.3 steals. Is that a possibility? Does the 17.5 points per game, if he hits another 1.5% on the year, does that go up to 18.5 or 19? All of these are possibilities. All of these are distinct possibilities. So I like him. I know that puts me in sort of a lonesome area. But there's something there. And the field goal percent is a big factor why. Courtney Lee is the next guy we're going to talk about, and possibly the last guy we're going to talk about on the New York Knicks. Because he is, by all accounts, the most boring player in fantasy basketball. I tried to temper that before I said it, but it's the honest-to-God truth. 12 points per game, 3 boards, 2.5 assists, 1.1 steals on 45% from the field, 92% at the free throw line. Very low volume, though. 1.1 turnovers. He's one of those kind of guys. But he doesn't have that one category that can lift the boat. Right? Like, how does a guy like Marvin Williams a couple of years ago end up as a top 75 play? Well, it's because he became so strong in turnovers at 0.8 that the fact that he was pretty boring in the other categories, almost the exact same numbers here as Courtney Lee. Almost the exact same. And that one little bit, even though, by the way, Courtney Lee already good in the turnover department, that little bit pushes him up 2 rounds. Because it's just so impressive to have a guy on your team that basically doesn't ever turn the ball over. And I should mention, by the way, Marvin Williams also like 6.5 rebounds instead of Lee's 3. So those two things together, all of a sudden, because everybody's so bunched, boom, you got yourself a top 75 guy. I know people like Courtney Lee, and he had stretches this year where he was very, very good. But I just can't get behind using him on a nightly basis. It just sort of pains me. You have to find those perfect windows where he gets hot and actually starts to take some shots. Because he's a good percentage guy, so you want him to be a bit more aggressive out there. He just never really is. Not for long enough. Oh, it's always so close. Good basketball player. Surprised the Knicks haven't been able to move him for something. Maybe they didn't try. You know, the contract is relatively affordable, $12 million a year. Wouldn't be surprised if he ended up back with the Houston Rockets at some point. Doesn't he feel like that kind of player these days? A spread the floor type. Remember he was with the Rockets way back in 2010. Great free three-point shooter. He's a career 39%er, by the way, from downtown. Shot 41% this season. Great free throw shooter. Good defender. Like, he's got all those things to fit in the modern NBA. And he doesn't demand the basketball. Knicks should be able to get something good for him. Although, again, 2 more years on his contract, so that does make it a little bit harder to move. Thought it was 1. Just a quick glance here. There are 2 more seasons left on his deal. Interested in Trey Burke. I believe his contract is non-guaranteed for next year. Tough to know exactly what the Knicks are going to do. Let's say, for argument's sake, that they do pick it up and keep him on the roster and pay him whatever small, pittance salary he's going to get. He's probably worth a flyer just to see what happens. Not interested in Emmanuel Mudiay. He has a garbage fantasy stat set. I'm not interested in Frank Ntilikina yet either. And I said that last year, and I know that I was sort of a lonesome dove on that one as well. Everybody was all bonered up about Ntilikina, and I kept saying, I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen him turn the corner. Yes, he has that sort of Rubio-esque potential, Chris Dunn-like in what could happen. But he did nothing this year, and low usage when he was actually out there. I need to see a guy who actually takes a step forward before I waste a pick on him. Trey Burke is a guy we saw take a step forward. You want to take a flyer on him at the end of your draft? Fine. I don't know. Maybe they just run him out there next year and see what the hell happens. Especially with, as we mentioned, KP down. They're going to need people just taking shots. So a quick recap here on the New York Knicks, then we'll wrap up today's podcast. Porzingis, I'm probably not drafting. As we mentioned, there are those very narrow windows where maybe he'd be useful for you. Enes Kanter, we have to see what happens. If he opts in, I'd like to take him in the 70s. Tim Hardaway Jr., I'm hoping he falls past 90. I think I would take him basically anywhere past 90, but obviously the further the better, and we'll get a better idea when we see how drafts start. Courtney Lee, very safe pick if you want to take him in like that 120, 130 range of your draft. But I'd rather chase upside at that point, so probably not drafting him. And then Trey Burke, to me, is someone to look at in that same range because there is upside. He might not pan out. He's probably not going to shoot 50% again next year. But maybe he does. Maybe he does pan out. Tough to say. Might as well take a flyer on it, see what happens. And then the rest of these guys, out to pasture. And that is your New York Knicks, and that is your podcast. I hope something else amazing happens over the next 24 hours because Neil Rochlani and I will be breaking it all down on tomorrow's podcast, and then Neil and Adrian will talk about draft results, and we'll wrap up the Eastern Conference. We'll wrap up the entire NBA. That'll be the last of our 30 teams in our team-by-team post-mortem here. And we'll talk free agency. That'll be the next thing coming right around the corner, man. That starts in 2 weeks. Oh, I love it. Year-round fun here in the NBA. I am Dan Besbris. This was Fantasy NBA Today, the podcast. Steal that line from Spaceballs. Fantasy NBA Today, the flamethrower. At Dan Besbris on Twitter, at HoopBallFantasy. And please, I beg of you, because we really want to build this thing, go check out our team pods. Christian does a wonderful job with Hoopball Kings and then Hoopball Lakers. We just put out a show last night on all the wacky free agent and LeBron stuff and Kawhi stuff in LA. It's a fun show. We have some laughs. It's really, it's informative, but it's like 50-50 information and entertainment. And that, to me, is really what makes that show so much fun. Have a wonderful Wednesday, everybody. As you know, back tomorrow, one more on Friday, and then we'll take the weekend off here at this one before starting it all over again, talking free agents next week. But I get ahead of myself. 2 more teams to cover. The Brooklyn Nets and the Toronto Raptors. That's all we got left. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.